Hi everyone, we're excited to release ThreatMate version 1.10. This release includes hierarchical multi-tenancy support for our managed service providers. And with that feature, they'll be able to efficiently and securely manage their customers, organize them into different tenants, apply access controls, and really deliver a good workflow experience in managing vast amounts of customers in an efficient manner. In this video, I'll go over the new multi-tenancy features that the product supports and guide you through how to best use them using our best practices. So the first important difference in the report and the dashboard here you can see is the multi-tenancy dropdown. The multi-tenancy dropdown is a global dropdown that controls what tenant's data you are accessing. So as you can see, we have selected the Acme LLC multi-tenant here, but you can as easily select Wawa LLC if you'd like. And now the dashboard, even though it looks the same, otherwise, it only reflects the data for this tenant. So if you are an MSP, you can now have unlimited number of customers that you can add here. And all of these customers will have their own data, and you can push data to different tenants and then look at the results per tenant. So as you can see, the reporting doesn't change. The tenancy is reflected in every interface of the product, including the security score. As you can see, this is only the multi-tenant view of the Wawa LLC. And same with acknowledged interface. You can see that there is no acknowledged exposures for this tenant, but if there were, they'll show here. And you can easily just switch the tenancy directly from the menu as you navigate through the different screens here. Same with our endpoint agents. They also support the multi-tenancy and so on. So how do you create tenants and how do you push data to a tenant? We have created this new interface called tenants under settings. And this interface allows you to add new tenants, edit tenants, and delete tenants very easily. Every tenant tree, as you can see here, starts with root. And root will be the tenant that every user that logs in sees. So every user will have a root tenant, and then they can create tenants underneath that root. So you can see the root tenant cannot be deleted. You can only add a tenant to it. And for example, let's create a new tenant. And in this example, let's call it customer A. You can see that this tenant will be created under the root parent. Customer A is created. The tenants are sorted alphabetically, so you can immediately see that customer A is created. You can additionally create, for example, customer B, again under the root tenant. And you can immediately see that customer B is created, and now we have two different tenants. If you click on a tenant, you can edit that tenant or delete that tenant. You can add additional tenants under that. We recommend that you keep your hierarchical structure flat as possible, because that makes it a lot easier to manage. There is no limits of how deep you can go, but we definitely recommend just keeping it one level down, one tenant for each of your customers, and this way you can easily manage your customers and get to the data quickly. So additionally, you can edit a customer. For example, you can change the name. Let's call it change customer A. And you can see that the name is reflected immediately. If you click on the tree now, you can see that the customer A and B already appear in the tree, and you can immediately select them, and the UI will reflect that change. You can also delete tenants. So deleting a tenant is a destructive operation. We highly recommend that you're very careful with deleting tenants, because this can lead to data loss. But we do have user permissions that allow you to be very selective of who you add the capacity to delete a tenant. Only super admins can delete a tenant. Everybody else can see the tenants, they can view reports, They can browse around, but they cannot delete a tenant. So it's important to know that there are user permissions that will help prevent accidents from happening. And we normally recommend limiting the number of super admins that can do destructive operations. So this way, your platform is nice and safe. So in this case, I'm a super admin for this tenant, and I can delete it. Now we have customer B here. So from a multi-tenancy perspective, we can now select our customer B from the drop-down, and you can see that that's reflected. So how do we add users, and how would users see their dashboard if they're part of a tenant? So adding users can be done from the users menu. The users menu is identical as before, but it does reflect the tenancy, as you can see here, for different users. So because I want to add a user in customer B's tenant, I can come here and add a new user, and I can call it customer B, for example. And we can make it, you can decide if you want that tenant to be admin or super admin, but the new security and isolation features will not allow that user to see any other tenant on your system. So making them a super admin is safe because this makes them a super admin only on their own tenant, and they cannot delete the root tenant as we discussed. So let's create them as a super admin just to show you how this works. So now we have customer B username added to the customer B tenant. If I log in as customer B, we can see that the customer actually cannot see any of the other tenants. It only sees itself, which is root, and all the reports affect that new tenant and the tenant they're in. Even if they go back to the tenants interface, they only have the root tenant. They can add more tenants if they'd like to, but normally customers don't manage tenants. They don't have to. From a user's perspective, they can control their own users. They can add more users if they want to, but every user added here will only reflect this one tenant. So with this ability, you can now add users for your customers, which will have very limited view of the dashboard. And on the other hand, you as a super user of the parent tenant, you can easily administer your tenants. You can add users to different tenants. You can give them permissions if you'd like. So this allows us to have completely streamlined experience when it comes to multi-tenancy. And if I log in back as an admin, I can still see that I have all my other tenants and they're pushing data. So let's talk about how do we push data to a tenant. So right now we're at customer B. In order to make the discovery sensor, which is our network collection technology, and the endpoint agent to push data to a particular tenant, we need to use their API keys. As you can see, the API keys can be retrieved in the discovery sensor interface. As you change different tenants, you see that they have different API keys. It's very important that we use the right API key because this is what determines where the data goes. So if you use the wrong API key for a discovery sensor, the data will be sent to the wrong tenant. Or if the API key is wrong altogether, the data will not be sent at all to our central dashboard. So by creating new tenants, you can deploy for example, the Windows discovery sensor by specifying the API key in the configuration, and that will make sure that this tenant now sends data just to that tenant. And the same thing with our endpoint agents. If you go to ThreatMate agent, that's the same API key basically. So both agents actually depend on the same API key. As long as you specify it in the endpoint agent and the discovery sensor, that data will be delivered to the same tenant. This is important. As you can see, the installation of the agents is very similar as before. The only difference is adding the proper API key, which will immediately redirect the data to the right tenant. From a user perspective, we mentioned that there is user permissions, and the user permissions, for example, for customer B's tenant that we've selected here, you can make that user a super admin, which will allow them to create new tenants, or you can just make them an admin, which will not allow them to create new tenants. So this way you can restrict who has the ability to create new tenants. Potentially, you probably don't want your customers creating new tenants unless they have a very good reason for it. So you can definitely remove the super admin permissions and just make them an admin. This will allow them to still log in, still view their tenant, still view the data, but not create new tenants. With that, we conclude our multi-tenancy feature. We would really appreciate your feedback as you start using it in your own organization. And we're looking forward to hear from you. Thank you very much.